Welcome back, everybody, to the Deep Dive.
Ah,
We like to take these deep dives into all sorts of fascinating topics, and today we're going to be looking at weather forecasting.
specifically in Korea.
Specifically in Korea, that's right. So we're going to be referencing some really, really cool source material today called Tuyuroga OU, which translates to the difficulty of weather forecasting and the climate crisis. Causes and impacts.
Just quite a mouthful.
It is quite a mouthful, but a really interesting title. And it really kind of hints at what we're going to be talking about today,
Yeah.
which is this kind of intersection of science and culture and even a little bit of philosophy when it comes to understanding the skies over Korea.
Yeah, I think that's what makes this topic so fascinating. We often think of weather forecasting as this purely scientific endeavor.
Right.
But in Korea, there's this rich history of cultural beliefs and practices that have shaped how people have understood and predicted the weather for centuries.
Absolutely. So we're going to try to cover all of that today, kind of see how it all fits together. So the big question is, how do they actually predict the weather?
Right.
Especially in a place as geographically unique as Korea.
Yeah, that's really the key here. Korea's geography plays a huge role in the complexity of forecasting.
Okay, so let's start with the basics.
Okay.
Where does weather forecasting even begin?
Well, it all starts with data,
Data.
Lots and lots of data.
Yeah.
That's really the foundation of everything. You can't make a prediction without information to base it on.
Makes sense. Speaking of data, I remember back in the day, those white boxes that used to be in every Korean schoolyard?
Oh, yeah. Those were a classic.
Those were our first glimpses into weather data collection, weren't they?
They were. It was like this little window into the world of meteorology for kids.
Yeah, I remember being so fascinated by them.
Yeah, me too.
Just like these simple instruments measuring temperature and wind speed and rainfall.
Yeah.
It was like math.
It was. But of course, things have gotten a lot more sophisticated since then.
Oh, yeah, for sure. We've moved way beyond the schoolyard now.
Exactly. We have modern weather stations all over the country now, and critically, a network of satellites constantly feeding us information.
Wow, so it's like a constant stream of data coming in from all directions.
It is. It's a fire hose of data,
A fire hose of data.
which is both a blessing and a curse,
How so?
Well, it's great to have all this information,
Right.
but it's also a challenge to process it all and make sense of it.
That's a good point. It's like having all these ingredients,
Yes.
but no recipe.
That's a perfect analogy.
Right. Like you can't just throw all this data into a computer and expect it to spit out a perfect forecast.
Exactly. This is where the human element comes in.
The human touch.
The human touch. It's where the art and the science of forecasting come together.
Okay, so tell me about that.
So you have these skilled meteorologists, the GERO, who take all this raw data, things like wind speed, cloud cover, temperature shifts, and they weave it all together into a forecast.
So they're like weather detectives.
Yes.
Looking for clues in the data.
Exactly. They're looking for patterns and trends and anomalies, trying to piece together what's going to happen next.
So it's not just about crunching numbers.
Yeah.
It's about understanding the atmosphere
Absolutely.
and how all these different factors interact.
It's like a giant puzzle.
A giant puzzle.
With a million pieces.
Okay, so we've talked about the data
Yeah.
and the human element.
Right.
But you mentioned earlier that Korea's geography makes forecasting particularly tricky.
Oh, absolutely. Korea has some unique geographical features that really throw a wrench into things.
So break it down for me. What makes Korea so special in this regard?
Well, first off, Korea is a very mountainous country. Nearly 70% of it is covered in peaks and valleys.
Wow, 70%. I knew it was mountainous, but I didn't realize it was that much.
It's a lot of mountains,
Yeah.
and all those mountains create microclimates.
Microclimates.
Yeah, so you can have very different weather conditions in places that are relatively close together,
Okay, I see.
just because of the way the mountains affect airflow and temperature and precipitation.
So even if two places are like a short drive apart,
Right.
they could have completely different weather.
Absolutely. It can change dramatically within a short distance.
That's wild. I never thought about it like that.
It makes forecasting a real challenge.
I bet. Okay, so mountains are one factor.
Right.
What else makes Korea's weather so unpredictable?
Well, then you add to that Korea's location.
Okay,
It's almost like a meteorological battleground.
a battleground. What do you mean?
Well, you have the cold, dry air from Siberia and the Sea of Okhotsk
Yep.
clashing with warmer, more humid air from the Yangtze River region and the Pacific.
So it's like a tug of war between these different air masses.
Exactly. And Korea's right in the middle of it all.
So one day you might get a hint of Siberia.
Right.
And the next day, a taste of the tropics.
Exactly. It makes for a very dynamic atmosphere that's constantly in flux.
Sounds like a lot for forecasters to grapple with.
It is. That's why they rely on what we call numerical weather prediction.
Okay, numerical weather prediction. Break that down for me.
So basically, it's using computer models to simulate how the atmosphere will behave.
Okay.
These models take into account all those factors we've been talking about.
Yeah.
The data, the geography, the different air masses,
Right.
and they try to predict how they will all interact.
So it's like creating a virtual Korea inside a computer.
Yes.
And then running different weather scenarios.
Exactly. It's a very powerful tool.
I bet. But didn't Korea initially use weather models from other countries?
That's right. Initially, they used models developed by Japan and then later models from the UK.
Interesting. So why the switch?
Well, they found that those models, while sophisticated,
Right.
weren't always a perfect fit for Korea's unique climate.
So it was a case of one size fits all not really working.
Exactly. It was like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole.
Makes sense. So what did they do?
Well, they decided to develop their own model specifically tailored to Korea's climate.
A Korean weather model.
A Korean weather model. They called it Kim.
Kim.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
So how has Kim been performing? I imagine creating a model that captures all of Korea's weather quirks isn't easy.
It's not easy at all. But Kim has actually been pretty impressive. It started out with a 91.4% accuracy rate.
Whoa, 91.4%. That's really good.
It is. But recently, it's dipped slightly to 89%.
A slight dip. Is that a cause for concern?
Well, it's something to keep an eye on for sure.
Okay.
It could be a sign that the model needs some tweaking.
To account for like changes in climate patterns, maybe?
Possibly. Climate change is definitely making things more unpredictable.
That's true.
We're seeing more of those really localized, short-lived downpours that are...
Oh, yeah. The ones that make it look like it's raining on a single car.
Exactly. Those are incredibly difficult to predict.
I bet. It's almost like the weather's becoming more mischievous.
You could say that. But there's also the fact that our expectations have changed.
What do you mean?
Well, with smartphones and the internet,
Right.
we have access to weather information 24/7.
So we've come to expect these hyper-accurate forecasts all the time.
I see what you mean.
And when the forecast is even slightly off,
Right?
people get upset.
That's true. We've become so accustomed to having this information at our fingertips that even a small miss can feel like a major inconvenience.
Exactly. But I think it's important to remember that weather forecasting is still a very complex science.
Okay.
And there will always be some degree of uncertainty.
Right. It's not an exact science.
It's not. It's more of an art form in some ways.
So we shouldn't expect perfection.
No.
Right.
But we should expect continuous improvement.
Right. So we've talked about the technical aspects of forecasting.
All right.
But I'm curious about the human impact.
Okay.
How do these forecasts actually affect people's lives in Korea?
Oh, they affect everything.
Yeah.
Weather forecasts are woven into the fabric of daily life in Korea.
Really?
Oh, yeah. I mean, think about it. Weather affects what people wear.
What they eat,
Okay.
how they travel when they plant their crops,
That's
when they go fishing,
Right.
even when they schedule their festivals and events.
So it's not just about knowing whether to pack an umbrella.
Yeah,
It's about livelihoods
absolutely.
and even safety.
Exactly. For farmers and fishermen especially,
Right.
accurate forecasts can mean the difference between a successful harvest or a lost season.
A good catch or an empty net.
Exactly. And for those who rely on tourism,
Right.
unpredictable weather can have a huge impact on their income.
It's true. I remember hearing about a cherry blossom festival a few years back that was a total bust because the blossoms bloomed too early.
Yeah, that happens sometimes.
A late frost or an early heat wave can completely change the experience.
Absolutely. And then there are things like heat waves and cold snaps,
Yeah.
which can have serious health implications.
That's true.
So hospitals and healthcare providers rely on forecasts to prepare for those kinds of events.
Wow. It's amazing how deeply ingrained weather forecasts are in Korean society.
It is. It's something that people really pay attention to.
Yeah, I've noticed that. It's like they have this cultural significance that goes beyond just practicality.
You've hit upon something really interesting there. Korea has a long and fascinating history of weather prediction that's deeply intertwined with their culture and beliefs.
Oh, really? That sounds fascinating. So tell me more about that. Like, did they have their own versions of weather models back then?
Well, not exactly models as we know them today,
Okay.
but they did have their own unique ways of understanding and predicting the weather.
Interesting. So what were some of their methods?
Well, in ancient Korea,
Hmm.
weather was viewed with a reverence almost akin to a divine force.
A divine force.
Yeah, it was crucial for their agricultural society.
Right.
So their attempts to understand it often involved a blend of observation, prayer, and ritual.
So they sought guidance from the heavens.
Exactly. They hoped to appease the weather gods and ensure favorable conditions for their crops.
I love that. Are there any specific examples of this in historical records?
Oh, absolutely. Korea's historical records
Right.
mention how events like eclipses were often interpreted as omens of future weather-related disasters.
Like droughts or floods?
Exactly. It's a fascinating glimpse into how they tried to decipher the patterns of the natural world.
It's like a mix of prophecy and forecasting.
It is, and it shows how deeply intertwined their beliefs and their observations were.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
But did they rely solely on celestial signs? Or did they also observe the natural world around them?
Oh, they were keen observers of nature. They looked to animal behavior, relied on generations of folk wisdom, and interpreted proverbs to anticipate weather shifts.
So like what? Give me some examples.
Well, there's a saying, don't hang laundry if there's a morning glow.
Really? Is there actual science behind that?
There is. A red sky in the morning can indicate a low-pressure system approaching from the west, which often brings rain.
Wow. So it's not just superstition?
No, it's based on observation and experience passed down through generations.
That's amazing. Any other examples?
Oh, plenty. There's eastern rainbows bring clear skies.
Okay.
This is rooted in the fact that rainbows in the east usually appear as the sun sets in the west, suggesting the rain has already passed.
So they were really paying attention to the details.
They were. And then there's the belief that changes in the sound of a geomungo, a traditional Korean string instrument, due to humidity, could predict rain.
Whoa.
Oh,
A musical weather instrument.
you could say that. It's a testament to how attuned they were to the nuances of the natural world.
I love that. It makes you wonder if we've lost some of that connection to nature in our modern lives.
It's a good point to consider. We're so reliant on technology these days that we sometimes forget to simply observe the world around us.
Yeah, that's true. Speaking of being in tune with nature's rhythms,
Yes.
we can't forget about the 24 solar terms, or agi, which have played a significant role in Korean life.
Ah, yes, those are still very much a part of the Korean calendar, even though they were actually developed in ancient China.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, they're based on the sun's movement,
Okay.
and they divide the year into 24 periods, each signifying a specific shift in agricultural practices.
It's like a built-in farmer's almanac.
Exactly. It helped people know when to plant, when to harvest, when to prepare for the changing seasons.
Makes sense. But I've noticed that sometimes the solar terms don't quite match up with the actual weather in Korea.
Yeah, that's true. For example, start of autumn, or lone phase, falls on August 8th,
Right.
which most Koreans would say is still very much summer.
It definitely doesn't feel like autumn in August.
No, it doesn't. And that highlights how these terms were primarily designed for agriculture in a different geographical location,
Okay.
not necessarily as a precise predictor of everyday weather in Korea.
So it's more about understanding the overall rhythm of the year,
Right.
the ebb and flow of the seasons, than predicting if you'll need a jacket on a particular day.
Precisely. It's a broader perspective on time and nature.
Okay, that makes sense. Now let's delve into another piece of Korean weather lore. Achy joints mean rain. You ever heard that one?
Ah, yeah, that's a classic.
My grandmother swore by it. She always claimed her knees could predict the weather better than any forecast.
Grandmothers are wise.
They are. But is there any scientific basis to that belief?
It's a bit of a mystery, to be honest.
Okay.
There are a couple of potential explanations, but nothing definitive.
Well, lay them on me.
Okay, so one theory suggests that the drop in atmospheric pressure that often precedes rain can cause changes in joint pressure,
Okay.
which can lead to discomfort or pain.
So our joints are like mini barometers,
On the way,
sensitive to those subtle shifts in pressure.
it's an interesting idea.
It is. What's the other explanation?
Well, the other explanation ties the pain to the colder temperatures that often accompany rain.
Okay.
Cold can cause muscles to stiffen,
Right.
which in turn could lead to joint pain.
So it might not be the rain itself,
Right.
but the conditions that often come with it.
Exactly. It's hard to say for sure.
It's another example of how closely Koreans observed the connections between their bodies and the natural world.
Absolutely. And how those observations became ingrained in their culture and traditions.
Okay, so we've talked about the past.
Yes.
But let's bring it back to the present.
Okay.
There's a common misconception I hear a lot these days. even with all this talk of global warming. And it's the idea that winters are getting colder.
Ah, yes. If global warming is real, then why is it so cold? Argument.
Exactly. How do we unpack that?
It's understandable why people might think that,
Right.
especially when they're bundled up in their warmest clothes shivering in the middle of winter.
Especially in a Korean winter.
Especially in a Korean winter. But if we look at the data,
Okay.
it actually tells a different story.
Uh-huh.
While we do still experience extreme cold events,
Right.
the overall trend shows that winters are, in fact, getting warmer.
Even in Korea.
Even in Korea, the average temperature is rising.
That's interesting.
And the duration of winter is getting shorter.
So those frigid spells we sometimes experience,
Right.
those are just short bursts.
Exactly. They might feel intense,
Right.
but they don't negate the long-term warming trend.
So it's important to look at the big picture,
Absolutely.
not just isolated events.
The data is clear on that.
Okay, so that's winters.
Right.
But what about the argument that Earth's climate has always changed naturally?
The Earth has gone through ice ages before argument.
That's the one.
It's a common refrain.
Yeah, and it's true, right? Earth's climate has fluctuated throughout its history.
It's true. Earth's climate is a dynamic system.
Right.
It's always changing.
So what makes this current warming trend different from previous natural fluctuations?
The key is the rate of change.
The rate of change.
Exactly. If you look at the data,
Right.
you'll see that the current spike in temperature is happening at an unprecedented pace.
Well, it's much faster than previous warming periods.
Much faster. And it directly correlates with human activities since the Industrial Revolution.
So the timing is too coincidental to ignore.
Exactly. That's why scientists are so concerned.
And that's why we're talking about a climate crisis now,
Yes.
not just climate change.
The term climate crisis reflects the urgency of the situation.
Because it's not just a gradual change.
Right.
It's a rapid and intense shift.
It's a disruption of the Earth's systems.
And that shift in terminology is important.
Yes.
Because it conveys the seriousness of this situation.
It's a call to action.
So this crisis is already having tangible impacts in Korea, right?
Yeah.
I mean, beyond the obvious things like hotter summers.
Oh, absolutely. Korea's already feeling the effects of the climate crisis in many ways.
Like what? Give me some examples.
Well, we've already talked about those fluctuating winters.
Right.
We're also seeing changes in agricultural patterns.
Okay.
Pests that would normally die off in colder weather are surviving,
Oh, wow. I had thought about that.
which can damage crops and impact food production.
So the delicate balance is being disrupted.
Exactly. Even apple cultivation in Korea has shifted northward.
Northward.
Yeah, traditional growing regions in Gyeongsangbuk-do are becoming too warm.
So they're moving the apple orchards further north.
They are to Gangwon-do, where it's cooler.
It's like a domino effect.
It is. One change triggers a cascade of consequences.
Okay, so the impacts are real.
They are, and they're only going to become more pronounced in the years to come.
That's a sobering thought.
It is. But I think it's important to remember that we're not powerless in the face of this challenge.
That's good to hear. So what can we do?
Well, that's a big question.
A big question with hopefully some answers.
Hopefully. And it's one that we'll delve into in more depth in our next deep dive.
Oh, you're going to leave us hanging. All right, well, I guess that means we'll have to wait for part 2 to explore those potential solutions.
You will. But in the meantime,
Yes.
I encourage everyone to think about the ways in which the climate crisis is already impacting their lives
Okay.
and what they can do to be part of the solution.
That's a good challenge.
Yeah.
All right, well, I'm already looking forward to part 2. Until then, listeners, stay curious. All right, so we're back and ready to dive into part 2 of our deep dive on weather forecasting in Korea.
Yeah, I'm excited to pick up where we left off.
Me too, especially since you ended part 1 with a bit of a cliffhanger.
A cliffhanger.
Yeah, you were about to tell us what we can do to address the climate crisis.
Oh, right. Well, I'm happy to tackle that question now.
Okay, so let's jump right in. If reducing the population isn't a viable solution,
Right.
what are our options? What can we actually do to change course?
It's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
That,
And it can feel overwhelming.
I agree.
The climate crisis is such a massive global issue.
It is.
Where do we even begin to find solutions?
It's true that the scale of the problem can feel daunting,
Right.
but I think the key is to remember that we're not alone in this.
Okay.
There are people all over the world working on this issue,
Right.
from scientists and engineers to policymakers and activists.
So it's a collective effort.
It is, and everyone has a role to play.
Okay, so where do we fit into all of this?
Yeah.
What can we as individuals do to make a difference?
Well, I think it starts with recognizing that our individual choices do matter.
Okay.
Even if they seem small,
Right.
they can collectively have a big impact.
And it's about those everyday decisions,
Yeah.
like what we eat,
Right.
how we travel, what we buy.
All of those things add up.
But let's be honest.
Okay.
It can be hard to stay motivated when you feel like your individual actions are just a drop in the bucket.
I understand that feeling. It's easy to feel powerless in the face of such a huge problem.
Right.
But imagine millions of people making those same choices, those drops becoming a powerful current of change.
It's about creating a ripple effect.
Exactly. And it's not just about what we do.
Okay.
It's also about what we support.
What do you mean?
Well, we can choose to support businesses and organizations that are committed to sustainability.
Right.
We can vote for politicians who prioritize climate action.
So our choices as consumers and citizens can send a powerful message.
Absolutely. And that message can drive change.
Okay, so that's the individual level.
Right.
But what about the bigger picture? What kind of systemic changes are needed to address the climate crisis?
Well, for starters, we need to transition away from fossil fuels.
Fossil fuels,
Oil, coal, natural gas,
big culprits.
the big culprits. We need to shift to renewable energy sources
Okay.
like solar and wind power.
Those are becoming more and more common.
They are, and they need to become even more widespread.
Right. But it's not just about energy production, is it?
No, it's about everything. We need to rethink how we design our cities,
Yes.
how we transport goods and people,
Mm-hmm.
how we produce food.
Right. It's about transforming our entire infrastructure.
It is, and it's a huge undertaking.
I bet. But it's necessary.
It is. We can't keep doing things the way we've always done them.
So this is where political will comes in, right?
Absolutely. We need leaders who are willing to make bold decisions, to prioritize long-term sustainability over short-term profits.
That can be a tough sell.
It can, but it's essential.
So we need to hold our leaders accountable.
We do. We need to demand action.
Okay, so we've got individual action,
Right.
systemic change, and political will.
All three are crucial.
Okay, so it's a multi-pronged approach.
Exactly. We need to attack this problem from all angles.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
But this brings up another question. Given that the climate crisis is a global issue, what role can Korea play? It's a relatively small country compared to some of the major emitters.
It's true that Korea isn't one of the biggest polluters,
Right.
but that doesn't mean it can't make a difference.
Okay.
In fact, I think Korea has the potential to be a leader in sustainability.
A leader in sustainability. What makes you say that?
Well, Korea is known for its technological innovation
Right.
and for its ability to adapt and change quickly.
Yeah, that's true. Korea's gone through some incredible transformations in recent decades.
Exactly. So I think Korea is well positioned to develop and implement cutting-edge solutions to the climate crisis.
So Korea could be a model for other countries to follow.
Absolutely. It could show the world what's possible.
That's a powerful vision. But shifting to a sustainable model isn't just about technology, is it?
No, it's not.
It also requires a change in mindset,
Yes.
a willingness to embrace new ways of thinking and living.
You're absolutely right. Technology is a tool,
Okay.
but it's the human element that ultimately drives change.
So we need to shift our values.
We do. We need to move away from a culture of overconsumption and disposability
Okay.
toward a more mindful and sustainable approach to how we live.
It's about being more conscious consumers,
Exactly.
thinking about the environmental impact of our purchases,
Right.
and supporting companies that align with our values.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that we're all interconnected
Okay.
and that our actions have ripple effects.
It's a big shift.
It is, but it's essential.
And it's about recognizing that sustainability isn't just about protecting the environment.
Right.
It's about improving our quality of life,
Absolutely.
creating healthier communities,
Yeah.
ensuring a just and equitable future for all.
Exactly. It's all connected.
So it's a holistic approach.
It is. We can't solve one problem in isolation.
Right. We need to see the interconnectedness of all these issues,
Precisely. The climate crisis is a symptom of a much deeper problem,
which is
our broken relationship with the natural world.
our broken relationship with the natural world.
Yeah, we've come to see ourselves as separate from nature,
Okay.
as if we're somehow above it or outside of it.
And that's led to a lot of the problems we're facing today.
It has, but it doesn't have to be this way.
So how do we fix it? How do we heal this broken relationship?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is. And it's one that I'm not sure we have all the answers to yet.
I agree. It's an ongoing process, a journey of learning and discovery.
A journey we're all on together.
We are. And I think the first step is simply to acknowledge the problem.
To recognize that our relationship with nature is broken.
Exactly. Once we do that,
Oh, wait.
we can start to look for ways to heal it.
So it's about shifting our mindset,
It is.
changing our perspective,
Right.
seeing ourselves as part of nature.
Exactly. And once we do that,
Yeah.
I think the solutions will start to become clearer.
That's a good point. It's like once you change the way you look at things,
Yes.
the things you look at change.
Precisely. Okay. Are you ready for a mind-bending concept?
Oh. I love a good mind-bending concept. Bring it on.
All right. So we've talked about individual action,
Right.
systemic change,
Mhm.
but our source material also touches on a more controversial approach.
Yeah.
Geoengineering.
Geoengineering.
It's basically the idea of deliberately manipulating the Earth's systems
Whoa.
to counteract climate change.
So like playing God with the planet.
It kind of feels that way, doesn't it?
It does.
But some people believe it's a necessary tool, given the urgency of the crisis.
So what are we talking about here? Give me some examples of geoengineering.
Well, one idea is to launch giant mirrors into space.
Giant mirrors.
Yeah, to reflect sunlight away from the Earth.
To cool the planet down.
Exactly. Another idea is to capture carbon dioxide directly from the atmosphere
Okay.
and store it underground.
So basically sucking the pollution out of the air.
Essentially, yeah. It sounds like science fiction,
It does.
but some of these technologies are already being developed.
Really?
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
It's like we're reaching a point where we have the power to control the climate.
We are, and that's both exciting and terrifying.
Right, because who gets to decide how to use that power?
That's the big question, and it's one that we need to answer very carefully.
Because there could be unintended consequences.
Oh, absolutely. We're talking about messing with the Earth's systems on a planetary scale.
It's like opening Pandora's box.
It is. We might solve one problem,
Right.
but create a whole host of new ones.
That's a scary thought.
It is, and that's why geoengineering is such a controversial topic.
Okay.
There are a lot of ethical and logistical considerations to weigh.
Right, because it's not just about the science.
No,
It's about the potential impact on human societies.
exactly. And on the balance of power between nations.
So it's a complex issue.
It is, and one that I don't think we have all the answers to yet.
Well, hopefully we'll figure it out before we accidentally turn the Earth into a giant snowball or something.
I hope so too. But in the meantime,
Yes.
I think it's important to have these conversations.
Talk about the risks and the benefits.
Exactly, to weigh the pros and cons.
Because
and
we need to make informed decisions.
we do. We can't just rush into geoengineering without thinking through all the implications.
Right. It's not a magic bullet.
It's not. It's a powerful tool.
Okay.
But like any tool, it can be used for good or for evil.
It's up to us to decide how we use it.
It is. All right. I think that's a good place to stop for now.
Another cliffhanger.
I can't help myself.
Well, I guess we'll have to wait for part 3 to delve even deeper into these fascinating questions.
You will, and trust me, it's going to be a wild ride.
Okay. I'm intrigued. Listeners, be sure to tune in for part 3 of our deep dive into the world of weather forecasting and the climate crisis. All right, we are back for the thrilling conclusion of our deep dive on weather forecasting in Korea.
Thrilling is one way to put it.
I mean, it has been a wild ride, hasn't it? From ancient weather lore to cutting-edge technology to the mind-boggling concept of geoengineering.
You've covered a lot of ground, that's for sure.
We have. And in this final part, I want to kind of zoom out a little bit
Okay.
and talk about some of the bigger picture ethical and philosophical questions that have emerged throughout our conversation.
I think that's important. It's easy to get caught up in the technical details.
Right.
But we need to remember that the climate crisis is ultimately a human crisis.
It's about our values,
Exactly.
our choices, our responsibility to the planet and to each other.
It's about recognizing that we're not just passengers on this spaceship Earth.
Right. We're the true.
We are. And we need to start acting like it.
So let's talk about responsibility. We touched on the ethical considerations of geoengineering,
Right.
but it seems like those questions extend far beyond any single technology.
They do.
It's about grappling with our role as humans in shaping the future of the planet.
It's about acknowledging the power we have
Mm-hmm.
and the responsibility that comes with it.
Because we've never had this level of influence over the Earth's systems before.
We haven't. And it's a bit scary, to be honest.
It is. I mean, it's like we've become the conductors of a planetary orchestra,
Okay.
but we're not quite sure what tune we're playing.
Or if we even know how to read the music.
Exactly. So maybe we need to start by learning the music.
I like that. We need to study the score.
Right, to understand how the different instruments work together.
To listen to the rhythms of the natural world.
To find our place in the symphony.
That's beautifully put.
It's about finding that harmony
It is.
between human needs and planetary boundaries.
Speaking of planetary boundaries.
Yes.
That's a concept I think is really important to understand.
Okay, so for our listeners who might not be familiar with this term,
Yeah.
can you explain what planetary boundaries are all about?
Sure. So planetary boundaries is a framework that identifies 9 critical Earth system processes.
Okay, 9.
Yeah, these are things like climate change, biodiversity loss, ocean acidification, freshwater use.
Okay.
These are processes that are essential for maintaining a stable and hospitable planet.
So basically these are the limits
Exactly.
that we need to stay within.
If we want to avoid pushing the Earth's systems into dangerous territory.
Because if we cross those boundaries,
Right.
there could be serious consequences.
There could. It could lead to irreversible changes in the Earth's climate and ecosystems.
And potentially make the planet uninhabitable for humans.
That's the worst case scenario.
And it's not just a hypothetical scenario. Right?
Yeah, unfortunately.
I mean, we've already crossed some of those boundaries, haven't we?
Yeah, we have. The scientific evidence is pretty clear on that.
That's a scary thought.
It is. It's a wake-up call.
So what do we do? How do we get back within those boundaries?
Well, it's not going to be easy.
Okay.
It's going to require a fundamental shift in our thinking and our behavior.
So it's not just about tweaking things around the edges.
Yeah.
It's about a complete system overhaul.
It's about transforming our relationship with the planet.
Transforming our relationship with the planet.
Yeah, moving away from a model of extraction and exploitation
Okay.
toward a model of regeneration and stewardship.
Stewardship, that's a good word. It implies a sense of responsibility,
It does. It implies that we're caretakers of this planet.
not just consumers.
Exactly. We're borrowing this planet from future generations.
Right. And we need to leave it in better shape than we found it.
That's the goal.
So how do we get there?
Yeah.
What does a sustainable future actually look like?
That's a question that I think a lot of people are grappling with right now.
Because it can feel abstract,
It can.
difficult to envision.
Yeah, when we talk about sustainability,
Right.
what are we actually talking about?
What does that world look like?
Well, I think it looks different for different people in different places.
Okay.
There's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Right. It's about finding solutions that work for each community and each ecosystem.
Exactly. But I think there are some common threads.
Okay, like what?
Well, for starters, a sustainable future is a future where we're living in harmony with nature.
Living in harmony with nature.
Yeah, where we're not constantly depleting the Earth's resources,
Right.
polluting the air and water.
Disrupting the balance.
Exactly. It's a future where we're using resources wisely
Okay.
and regenerating the ecosystems that we depend on.
So it's about finding that balance
It is.
between human needs and planetary limits.
That's the key. And it's not going to be easy.
Right.
It's going to require us to make some tough choices,
To change our lifestyles.
to rethink our priorities.
To challenge the status quo.
Exactly. But I believe it's possible.
Me too.
Mm.
I think humans are capable of amazing things when we put our minds to it.
We are. We've overcome incredible challenges in the past.
And we can overcome this one too.
I agree. And I think Korea has a unique role to play in this global effort.
Okay, so bring it back to Korea.
Yeah.
What can Korea do to be a leader in sustainability?
Well, as we've talked about, Korea is a technologically advanced country
Right.
with a strong tradition of innovation.
So they can leverage those strengths
They can to develop and implement new technologies and solutions
to show the world what's possible.
to be a beacon of hope.
A beacon of hope. I love that.
Yeah, and I think Koreans are also deeply connected to their culture and heritage,
Mm-hmm.
which includes a deep respect for nature.
Yeah, that's been a recurring theme throughout our conversation.
It has, and I think that respect for nature can be a powerful driving force for change.
So it's about drawing on the best of both worlds.
It is.
The technological and the traditional.
To create a future that's both sustainable and culturally vibrant.
That's a beautiful vision. Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have.
From the nitty-gritty of weather forecasting to the grand challenges of the climate crisis.
It's been quite a journey.
It has. And I hope our listeners have found it as thought-provoking as I have.
Me too.
I think the main takeaway for me is that the future is not something that just happens to us.
Right.
It's something we create,
We do, through our choices,
our action.
our beliefs.
So let's choose wisely
Let's act boldly
and let's create a future that we can all be proud of.
to a brighter future.
To a brighter future. Cheers to that. And that's a wrap on our deep dive into weather forecasting and the climate crisis in Korea. Thank you for joining us.